perché io ho questa qui, ho questi cerchiali da short distance. E per questo... Io sono miope ma già ho sviluppato la cataratta, un po' giovane. Quindi ho bisogno di una... Quando c'è troppa la luce proprio in faccia, quindi mi dà ancora più fastidio. Vabbè. Poi sta andando bene.
Yeah. Okay, please take your seats. We have quite a number of presentations in the next sessions. We will start with Francesco Caridei, talking a little bit about the transferability of DOA certificates. We have some feedback from the side meetings from Tuesday for the first two groups, and we have a few interesting topics about flight test. And just to let you know, finally they found the packet from DHL, so the flyer arrived. Thanks to my colleague Philip, who managed to get it. It will be placed outside, so you should all find this kind of flyer on the outside desk with the information. And as it said here, the frequency will also depend on your feedback. Do you find it useful? Do you have proposals for improvement, etc.? We thought initially about twice a year, but this could be even more often. That depends. But then I would like to hand over directly to Francesco to talk about the first subject, transferability of DOA. Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. This is an interesting topic because we had a lot of questions recently. Indeed, we prepared the presentation together with Alex, that is the other section manager of the DOA department, but unfortunately cannot be here today, but it's worth to mention this. So, basically, we will go through a first introduction, I will say disclaimer, then we go through a regulatory basis and our EASA understanding, some cases, a conclusion that we recommend to follow, and then you will have time for questions, if any. So, basically, this is trying to collect our experience in this topic, but does not intend to be an additional guidance material. And what is our experience? That each case is really particular. So, it needs to be very often evaluated, case by case. We will have later a list of cases. Some are really straightforward, so we give already a position, but there are some that are in this grid zone, I would say. So, a little bit of remembering about Part 21. So, DOA certificate is clearly not transferable unless there is a change of ownership. Just for completeness, we mentioned the 247, what are the possibilities. And but what is really the key point for us is the guidance material about transferability. The GM said that the transfer, in the first bullet, the transfer will only be agreed in case where the organization remain substantially unchanged. And this is our first interpretation. Unchanged means same resources leading to the same scope of work. Then I would say the controversial part is the bullet 2, because in the first part is trying to give room for transferability in case also change of ownership, change of company name, change of registration. But in the second part is giving something that will exclude the possibility, because when we are speaking about reapproval, you will see in the following, reapproval means very often a new investigation. And then the third bullet is a really particular case, receivership. Receivership happens when there is a bankruptcy process or an insolvency process, or the rule said other equivalent legal process. So this is a situation that unfortunately happened very often recently, and then something to take in account for the transfer. So this is our point. The transfer is possible only in case the organization remains unchanged substantially following a change of ownership. And as I already said, there are borderline cases. Let's go with the cases. So this is in case of bankruptcy. Just a second. Yes. And it happens very often that the staff is creating a new company. And it is also moving to a new site. So we have a new company registration, means new DOA. I think it is straightforward. Then we have staff, again in a case of bankruptcy, the staff is moving in existing company that is not already DOA holder. But then, because we have a new company registration, we consider it is a case for a new DOA. Then we have another typical case, DOA holder split, means an existing organization separate in two. The separate part of the organization, there is a part receiving a new company registration, so clearly is a new DOA. But in case we have, for the remaining part of the organization, obviously there is no new company registration, so it remains a significant change. Then we have the case of a DOA, practically we have a new owner, complete new owner, but there is no change in the organization. So the head of design, the key personnel remain exactly the same site. Then there is no change in the company registration, and then it is considered a significant change. Now we are moving to the borderline cases. It's a case of a new owner, but this affects the legal entity. So it is new name, new address. Then we have a new company registration, and this is one of the cases that is really case by case. Because just to make an example, there are, for some countries, just moving from town A to town B produce a new company registration, a new legal entity. So this could be something that we take in account to decide for the significant change. But it's really case by case. Then we have the merging with another company, and these affect the legal entity of the DOA. Again, depends really, is a really case-by-case situation. This is a very particular case, change of ownership at the level of parent company. So practically the organization is unchanged, but the company as a separate entity became part, like a department or a business unit of the mother company. But again, it depends if there are additional situations correlated. So there is a new company registration, but again, we have to evaluate case by case. We cannot come with a rule. So, conclusion. A DOA is in general not transferable, but except for a change of ownership. But each case, we repeat, we stick on that, need to be individually assessed. And an additional point, the accumulation of various significant events in the organization, in the change in the organization can lead really to a reapproval. And the reapproval, we can manage the reapproval like a new full complete initial investigation or simplified, means that some aspects are really condensed. Anyway, an application for significant change or a new day is always requested in any case. But the spirit of Part 21 of the GM in our understanding that this situation of the transfer should be a situation, I used this coming from the thermodynamics, with something with a small minimum increase of entropy. Otherwise, if we add too much things, EASA is not able anymore to accept a significant change. So, what do we recommend? We recommend that this transfer event is as much simple as possible, postponing later additional changes, like the CEO, like the head of design, for example, and to contact at the early stage the EASA DOA team leader before you take any definitive decision, because very often we receive the Form 82 with everything already done, and it's too late. You have already created a new company, you have already in mind that you have transferred the DOA, but we cannot. Simply we cannot in some cases. So it's important for us to raise this awareness in a way that you contact us as soon as possible. We understand that sometimes the decisions are coming from the top management, but for sure you are consulted at a certain point, and so we expect that you recommend them to wait for the decision, if possible. And then...
Okay, thanks, Francesco. We have, I think, some problems with Slido. We just received one question so far. The question is how to streamline the reuse of approved data between DOAs established within the same parent group, I guess, with full access to the relevant approved data. Is that possible, and how could it be done?
Yes, I mentioned it before. It really depends from the case. I assume that the CVE qualification will not change if you do not intend to change the scope of work, to extend the scope of work. So again, the basic rule is if you leave the scope of work unchanged, for us, became easier to move to a significant change rather than a new approval. But anyway, there are cases that we are requested to go for a new approval, and then in that case we try to apply common sense, as some aspect of the initial investigation can be really short. So what is mentioned is a simplified process for initial investigation.
Gilles, I think you mean how to use it within product certification, for example, or Alain, do you have some feedback on that? If common data created by one DOA can be used by another entity within the same parent group, which is its own legal entity.
Ah, this is the
That's
question.
a different story.
Ah.
In real time like that, I would prefer to take the question on board and will reply offline because we have a lot of experience with some major DOAs, but I prefer to check exactly and to provide you with a clear, concise and accurate reply. So accept my apologies not to reply right now and we'll come back offline.
Okay, there's one other question now. The change of ownership, how many percentage of the share transfer constitutes a change? So I don't know whether we come now into shareholder things and economical things, but I don't know.
Something to review case by case. I will not say in advance, and probably I will not go so deep probably in detail at this point. I think we could have a case when the one owner then at a certain point introduce another shareholder to share the capital and the risk. But in this case, I will consider a change of ownership, yes, because the change of shareholder is affected. But if you leave the DOA unchanged, so head of design and the rest, for us is a follow under 247, is not 249.
Okay, thanks very much. Francesco?
Hello, just one question here, Dennis Santa Maria. Again, you covered a lot of scenarios, but what you didn't cover is if you move a DOA from a non-EU country to a EU country. Now, there are two things here. Logistics means that maybe significant people will be changed, the head of design and CVEs, but the board remains the same, the ownership remains the same, but they're moved from a non-EU to EU. Will they then enjoy the privileges of being now EU DOA?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Sorry, will it be a significant change or will it be a new DOA?
As stated by the principle of the change of legal entity and also consider the change of the principal place of business, I would say that is a new DOA. But again, don't put the words from in this way. Let's discuss when you have the real case. But in principle, I would say it's a new DOA.
Maybe you have to consider one thing. The change and getting a new DOA does not automatically mean we do a complete full investigation. For everything that remains, we can more or less take credit. So you have to distinguish the legal act of getting a new DOA and what is the workload behind it in checking that you or the new entity is still compliant.
You remember the full, complete investigation and or the simplified process in this case.
Okay, thanks for that. And then we come to the first feedback session. And the group one is the group from Airlines, and I would like to welcome Glenn Pearson and Tim Munro, who volunteered or were volunteered, I don't know, to give the presentation and the feedback from the side meeting.
Yes, definitely were volunteered. Just like to say my son is really excited that I'll be appearing on YouTube, so I better not disappoint. Just looking. Oh, it's that one. I thought it was going to be the big one. This is really going to be an eye test. Okay, so my name's Glenn Pearson. I am Chief of the Office of Airworthiness for British Airways, and my colleague here is Tim Munro, who is Deputy Head of Design for Qantas. We'll be presenting the Airlines side group discussion points. So you can see from the list of the composition of our group, we had quite a wide range of representatives from different sized airlines, which made the discussions very fruitful.
Okay, over the course of the day, as Glenn said, it was very fruitful discussions. It's good to get a bunch of airlines in the room that have a distinct requirements, often different to DOAs in either TCH holders or other areas of the business. And the areas that affect us tend to be more associated with our association with our camo and the operation more as opposed to initial certification. One of the areas that we touched on was complexity at times in finding all the regulations, requirements, guidance material that we have to follow and adhere to operate as a DOA in the airline environment. And not only all airlines tend to do a degree, the information's there, but often you need to know where you find it, and it's often quite difficult. And we're quite happy that EASA informed us of the e-rules project, which we believe will become online sometime next year, which will allow us to actually tailor the information on the EASA website to provide us a comprehensive and consolidated list of requirements for our business as we need it. The second area that was discussed, and it was quite robust discussion between the group, and a common consensus again being airline DOAs, is we have a very strong relationship with our camos, is the impact of OSD. And specifically, when OSD is introduced by DOA, how is the circle closed between the DOA side potentially and the operational side and through the camo? What has been noted by a number of the airline DOAs is that the OSD statement in SBs issued by the TC holder is not always visible or not even there. And while the obligation is on the TC holder to provide OSD to the airlines, it typically won't come through the engineering, through the DOA side of the airline or the camo side of the airline, but it will go down their operational side. And it's very hard to close the loop to ensure that these requirements have been followed. OSD is often mentioned, but it's mentioned in the affected documents part, and that is typically only a positive statement that OSD is applicable, but the airline also needs to know in their DOA camo areas whether there is no OSD implications either. So just as a positive statement, OSD is there that you're made aware of, a negative statement is just as important to us. So the outcome of this is that we've requested at EASA to introduce some guidance material to ensure that positive, I guess, identification of OSD is provided in service literature provided by TCH holders.
So the next point of discussion was to do with the design and installation of internal and external placards and decals, which of course must be done using a DOA, but we felt that the requirement to need a Form 1 with these placed unnecessary burden on an organisation and also limited our ability to go to different manufacturing organisations. So whilst the materials that tested have been tested for flammability, so therefore meet the requirements, we feel that there's scope perhaps for a rulemaking activity from EASA to allow acceptance of these on CFCs, which I believe may be included in some of the presentation material that we were given yesterday, although obviously there wasn't complete detail on the items that will be accepted under CFCs in the future.
Maybe if I can react, I'm not quite sure whether it's covered by this rulemaking task for accepting things without an EASA Form 1. Could well be, but we have to go back and check.
Okay.
And then maybe edit.
Okay, so our request is that if it isn't currently, then perhaps it could be. Thank you. Next discussion point was to do with the correct approval classification statement on vendor service bulletins. For the DOA, this is quite clear. It's specified in Part 21, the exact statement that we need to have for approval, quoting our approval number. But vendor service bulletins, which are relying on TCH approval, are often not clear on the approval path. So we think that perhaps guidance from EASA on the statement that goes into those vendor service bulletins would be useful for operators.
Maybe just a comment on that. I think this should be addressed by the new Part 21, because currently it's a privilege for them to make the statement that it's approved on behalf of the DOA. In the future, it will be an obligation, and therefore there's some change in this approach, and it should be then clearly visible.
Okay. It seems like EASA was listening in. Thank you. Okay. So our next point was to do with STC renumbering or revisions causing potential difficulties for configuration control by camos. So, for instance, version 2 of an STC, which might have been raised in version merely to add another operator, but version 1 might be still applicable to your own operator and might cause some confusion as to whether the camo needs to embody version 2 or whether version 1 is still valid within the organisation. And for our discussion on this particular point, we're requesting EASA maybe to raise an FAQ just to clarify this issue.
The final, while this list of what we've discussed now isn't the comprehensive of the day's activities, they're the ones that engendered the most discussion. The final one we wanted to present from our day on Tuesday was the management of STCs in the event that an STC becomes orphaned due to the holder going out of business or some other requirement. And the discussion was quite robust and quite fruitful with the EASA, and their recommendation is the STC holder, if they're going out of business, should find a new owner. Not always practical. In that case, they said EASA would then take over the ownership or holding of the STC for the purpose of ongoing operation of aircraft that we have. However, the comment was made that in the event, though, that an unsafe condition is found related to a modification introduced by the STC, at that point then EASA would then cancel the STC, which would put any operator operating with aircraft configured to that STC in an unenviable position of having to park until such time as another approval holder or the STCs are reversed on it. Again, it's something that EASA was very forthcoming in the discussions and quite clear on the position, but again, if there's something was put out in the way of some guidance material or FAQ, just so operators would know what the situation is when STCs become invalid or redundant. So that was the, I believe, just a quick happy snap of our little party that we had on Tuesday. Just in closing, I'd like to thank EASA for the opportunity for this meeting on Tuesday. Myself from an airline that's outside of EASA's jurisdiction, and here mainly because we now hold a EASA 21J design organisation. It's a great day for the airlines who are DOAs to get together, share ideas, common issues. Often on your own you may think you're the only person there, but the opportunity EASA gave us quite fruitful, and also the ability to look at it from the aspect of another regulatory body under which we operate. While the names are different and the regs are different slightly, it's amazing how similar the problems we all face are. So thank you for putting the day on for us.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback, and I would also like to thank the other colleagues who supported this group. I think the main facilitator for this particular group was Pablo Antonionet, who more or less moderated and managed to support you with everything, that you could have the discussion among yourself and with the other colleagues. But now a few questions and one comment from Alain.
Yeah, one comment on the orphan certificates in general. This has always been a concern to us because we spoke today about orphan STCs, but in the past and still now we have had a number of GA, that's the next domain, GA orphan TC. And that was really a problem to us, how to handle the case. And what we have now, what you heard, sorry, now for STCs is more or less what we've tried to develop also for GA more globally. We had before what we call SIS, the specific airworthiness specification. That was a way to substitute to a TC holder when the TC holder disappeared to keep the aircraft in service. And we had already this challenge once having a major accident on an orphan aircraft, which we had no other way than to ground it until someone took over and came up with the appropriate set of reparations to repair, sorry, I'm speaking half French, a set of repairs to get it back into service. And in the end, this repair was made available to all other aircraft as any normal certified product. And what we what we are doing now for STCs is really to develop this philosophy to the extreme because STCs is even a wider challenge. So thank you.
You mentioned one point on OSD. I don't know whether it will be addressed in the presentation we get later on OSD. I don't know whether Andrea Boiardi, our chief expert, is with us in the afternoon. Okay, maybe we can then relate the question on OSD to him. Jill, you have a question? Can we have a microphone? Thanks.
Thank you. Just as an answer to the OSD and service built-in connection. So, as a manufacturer, our view is that the OSD is exactly like the flying manual or the ICA. So when a service bulletin is released, it should be released with the relevant design aspects, instruction for implementation, but also the relevant change to the flying manual, the relevant change to the ICA, and the relevant changes to the OSD as well. So there should be no difference between the way OSD is made available compared to flying manual and the ICA availability together with implementation of a new change.
I think as an operator, whilst we respect what you're saying, whilst OSD is still in its infancy, we need that clarity that it's been considered. So even if it's a negative statement, at the moment, we'd still like to see that statement that it has been considered and it's not been affected.
Okay, then thanks very much to both of you. And as you were volunteered and didn't volunteer yourself, we have a small present for both of you. To be brave enough to stand up in front of the audience.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, then we can come to the next group, the General Aviation Group. And I would like to welcome a few more people now. Jörg Anbihend, Boris Kolmai, and Tine Tomacic. And I would like to thank Carmen Bosso and Mariano Landi, who more or less run the group and organize everything to facilitate the discussion among the colleagues. So the floor is yours.
So good morning, everybody. My name is Jörg Unbehend from Diamond Aircraft Industries. Tina Tomacic, Boris Kölmel, and myself represent some results, some discussion points from the side meeting of the General Aviation Group. First, we discussed some feedback from general certification and surveillance activities. Then there were discussions about Part 21 proportionality, about level of involvement for general aviation companies, the new amendment of CS23, and we came to conclusions. First point from the surveillance activities, type design data. Where's the borderline between design and production data? In which depth the design holder shall provide design data or data to the production organization? It depends. It depends on the size of the organizations, of the individual organizations, of the design and production organization, and it depends on the criticality of the parts that are produced or components that are produced. The minimum what must be provided is a clear definition of fit form function that puts the production organization into the position to perform the production and to perform the conformity inspection. Too much detail could result, if not really required, to define the type design, could result in a lot of production deviations and concessions that have to be processed again by the design organization. If the production organization is large enough to establish a production engineering in turn, then a lot of procedures and processes can be owned by the production organization. But on the other hand, if the type design, the compliance and the performance of the type design depends on processes and procedures, these procedures and processes are clearly part of the type design data. Next point was several manufacturers experience problems when certifying engine installations according to CS23 in the airframe. So there were cases where we had compromising information between the engine installation manual and CS23 requirements. In other cases, there was a lack of data that the design organization needs to establish compliance against CS23, 1306, 8 and 9, HERF, lightning and system safety requirements. This lack was in particular in cases of electronic control units where we missed failure modes and effects data. So we came to the recommendations that either CSE should require the TC holder of the engine to provide all these data in the engine installation manual, or Part 21 should require the TC holder to provide this information, in particular HERF lightning system safety, in separate documents, not necessarily the installation manual, but as a kind of approved data. Another point often discussed in general aviation is how to implement parts that are approved as or parts or items that are approved as part of the type design into the type design data. And not the only possibility, but a very common one, is to establish technical specifications that define main features, functions, fit, form, whatever is required, so that production organization can investigate and declare the conformity against this specification on the Form 1. This may also include additional requirements from the design organization, which they needed based on failure analysis and criticality, which they needed to establish the compliance. This information can also be included in the specification. Last point from the surveillance activities, a short discussion about master minimum equipment list for CS23 aircraft, in particular here ELR1 and ELR2 aircraft. So in Europe there is no requirement to have a separate MMEL. The POH is seen, or the POH or AFM data, the equipment list, is normally seen as sufficient even for a commercial operation of ELR1 and 2 aircraft. However, when validating in other countries, there may be the requirement to establish a separate MMEL, even for ELA 1 and ELA 2, and that's part of the harmonization activities that are just ongoing and expected to happen soon. So, and with the next Part 21 proportionality, I hand over to Tina Tomacic.
Tina Tomacic is my name. I come from a small aeroplane producer called Pipistrel. We are known as the troublemakers, flying electrically. We've done it with fixed wing, so LSA. We're coming to VLA in 23, but wait for us in 27 as well, and then you'll see. So I was asked to talk about the two difficult topics that were discussed on the agenda yesterday and also today. Let's start with the proportionality. How many out there, can we raise hands? I would just want to check something. Can identify themselves with liking general aviation? Yeah, do you like general aviation? Wow, that's a good result. Now, keep your hands up. How many of you like the concept of proportionality? Even more. Amazing. So, to me, this is a really big step forward. You know, it's kind of like now, if you walked into a clothing store and you say, I want to buy a new shirt, and the salesman says, we only carry one size, XL. This is what Part 21, in particular, linked to production, is at the moment. So we definitely welcome these changes, but they have been appreciated with hesitance. So in the sense of SMS, which is a new buzzword coming from the 2000s onwards, let us be fully honest within the group how we accepted that. So for the newcomers, obviously they see benefits. For people who have already adopted systems, in particular with light general aviation fixed wing size, there is hesitance. And this in particular has to do with oversight. You know, once you are talking about a common approach, DOA, POA somehow together merged in a new, not a monster, a new kind plush animal which will help small producers. How does the oversight look like? Who comes to actually check on what you are doing? Is it EASA? Is it national authorities? How will this happen? And I think we all need to contribute about how we want to compose these teams. Not only that, how it will be ensured that these teams actually check more so what the product caters than the procedures. Because this is the biggest cultural change that's associated to proportionality. It's scary to think that procedures may not be followed, but the product is good in the end. But this is coming. Yeah, this is coming, and I see interesting reactions from the podium here as well. Come on, you raised hands, you liked it, so let's follow this. Yes, one more plea. I applaud Technam for already sharing their real-life experience on level of involvement, which, by the way, is my next slide. But the proportionality goes a long way. It goes from the simplest to the most complex. So not only from general aviation segments, it would be nice if we had some volunteers for the next workshops to comment and express their second guesses and their areas of concern, so that this field could grow and produce a rather brilliant new Part 21 light. Level of involvement, the new cool thing that awaits all of us. By the way, it's inevitable. If you didn't understand this yesterday, it is coming. So the wall of fire is approaching all of us. We can do just one thing. Or maybe not. We can be hands-on or hands-off and pretend like it's not going to happen. So Technam yesterday showed us how they did it, and it's interesting, and I think Scandinavian Avionics contributed it. As an STC-oriented company, they don't see so much improvement in that. But we can learn perhaps something from history. Does somebody remember when the concept of CCL's compliance checklist was first brought to life? Okay, I thought I was too young for that, but maybe everybody's too young for that. So somebody at some point invented the compliance checklist. And I'm sure that at that point, everybody who would be sitting at a similar kind of a training event would say, bah, this is more work for us again. And yet it worked. So if we believe in change, change will happen, and change will happen in a good way. So we decided in the GA group to be proactive and to volunteer for pilot projects so that some experience can be gained before the inevitable wall of fire hits in 2019. Yeah? But we also have a pledge for EASA. Can you please update the website? Like the material on there is not actual, and what we heard yesterday was much cooler than what is on the website. So let us start working and reading the same pages. I did not read the slides on purpose. You can all do that and you will have them distributed. Thank you for listening.
Tina, thank you. Great speaker.
Oh, and by the way, thank you for the gift.
You didn't get it yet, right?
Were you volunteered or did you volunteer?
We were volunteered, all of us. My name is Boris Körmel. I'm from Aircraft Design and Certification. We are a service provider for TCs, so to say. So it's our job to do TCs. Our product are TCs and STCs, so it's our common field of work. We work every day with this, and we are honored to be the guinea pigs for CS23 Amendment 5. We are running the first project which tries to apply the new concept of this CS23 Amendment 5, and we really do appreciate it, and it was a great investment of EASA, of this F44 group, to get to this stage, and we get a chance to explore new fields and to certify different products, but, and I want to say this clearly, it's only for experienced applicants, and we should not forget that, because we might have a nice, shorted, now 60-paragraph CS23 Amendment 5, but all the other 360 pages are still there, and we still need to comply to them, no matter if it's CSVLA, CS23 Amendment 4, or if you go and count the pages of all the ASTMs which are below, you will see it's many more pages than before, and it's much more complicated to understand the system which is going to be behind it. Pasquale had a great presentation yesterday evening and showed how the concept could look like, of how you can arrange the objective rules and the AMCs belonging to it, and but if you then add also the new CDI concept for level of involvement, then you see your matrix is getting bigger and bigger, and you need to have a really good overview to understand what you need to do to get in the end to a certified product. So it's great, it's giving new possibilities, but let's be honest, it's not getting simpler, it's just getting more possibilities. The AMCs, the CS23 Amendment 5 has been published somewhere in May. We saw that yesterday. It should have been introduced, no, it was then active in August 2017, but now it's November and we still cannot use it. There's no official AMC, and the only way of doing this is actually on the next slide, is that we, on a project level, apply this translation table which has been provided, and hope that the changes and movements which are still ongoing within this gap analysis and the translation table still being in movement will not have too large impacts on the products we are type certifying. So there's a lot of movement, and we need to be aware of it and stay aware of it, and it bears risk. And I know that some companies did not apply to this because of that risk. So get it done is my call. Well, it's actually, a lot of that has been said yesterday already. The AMCs can, no, the CS23 Amendment 5 allows to do a kind of a cherry picking, so you can create your own AMCs. So now we have AMCs to an airworthiness code, and we have a lot of possibilities. But as said, as it been said yesterday, the FAA harmonization seems to be of a greater concern than actually getting in the other countries type certificates on the market. So I hope that this priority might change in the near future, or both sides of the Atlantic get it done. But yeah, waiting for a year after giving the promise that it's coming, I think it's time to get it done. One point which was raised the day before on Tuesday and has not been said in the presentation yesterday are that we are seeing quite some concerns for STCs, because the certification basis will be very vague in terms of due to the flexibility in the AMCs. So the STC applicants will have difficulties in finding the correct airworthiness code or the correct certification basis which had been used for the initial product. And it will be necessary that EASA especially will take great concern in looking really precisely what the certification basis was before they accept the certification basis then of an STC. So the definition on the type certificate data sheet of the certification basis will look completely different, and EASA will need to think of how this will actually look like to be sure that the STCs are really based on the correct data, especially when they are reverse engineered. This could be challenging. The new CS23 Amendment 5 will require training for CVEs, because they might not be used, or they might not even know for what they are signing, because the paragraphs look completely different. And for what are they actually signing? Are they signing for the AMC, for the requirement in the AMC? Are they signing for the objective requirement or the objective rule? Also, the according process of how is the compliance reported, how does a compliance record sheet look like? All these forms and procedures will need to be adapted within the companies to document properly and to have a proper documentation for showing of compliance. I'm also honored to make the conclusion of the whole session. As in this workshop here, the most part of the time we spend on discussing on the LOI implementation, especially for the GA companies, of course. The Part 21 proportionality, as has been said, and the significant concerns we have in the industry of GA, that putting together DOA and POA currently limits that, will lead to the fact that the NAAs will create the special team which goes then and needs to check the DOA and plus POA procedure. And as Tina was hoping, and we are all hoping that this will happen more on a product level, we expect that the people are accordingly trained and understand what they are actually touching there. We discussed, of course, several of these questions, especially to the CS23 Amendment 5, which I was presenting now here. Actually, I'm not sure if that... there's a last slide with other conclusions to which I, of course, agree. We appreciate the organization of this chance for us to exchange the information. And I think it is important to address that we need this, and it's necessary for the industry, because if I just want to summarize what we discussed the last 2 days together, actually, and if you sum it up together and you focus it to one GA company, you end up, we have new LOI with this definition of CDI, which creates an update of the certification. You have new certification programs, you explained it nicely. We have the Part 21 proportionality with Phase 1 and Phase 2, and we have CS23 Amendment 5 with a completely new concept. We have ZEPIAC, which we have to implement, and there are the other confusions which have been created by legislation of OSD and FTOM and CS-STAN introduction. So you see, the small GA companies which are supposed to do innovation, which are supposed to design products, are actually spending most of their time in trying to adapt to what is coming. And without this forum of getting informed and exchanging under each other in the GA community, what is the easiest way to do that kind of rule-making, to comply to this rule-making rush, which is in this environment, is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, we would really we will not be able to do the innovations which we are supposed to do, especially also with now the electric products and other innovations coming for stability of aircrafts. Yeah, so still I want to thank for the whole time and the nice hosting of the event, and yeah, we hope to continue next year and to follow up on all those actions and needs we have in GA community. Thank you.
Maybe just one comment, and thank you for the very frank and open presentation. And for sure, there was a key word in your slides, EASA to follow up. It is clear we will follow up. You saw yesterday Dominique Roland, and we still have a few colleagues from GA in the room. We have a specific aspect in our GA department. They're all passionate. I see Manfred, he has not even taken a seat. He's standing because he wants to see what's going on. But I'm joking, but it is true. And you saw Dominique yesterday evening, when you start talking with him on a topic like drones, you can skip the dinner, the night, and you continue forever. Same here. GA task force, the new proportionality, etc. It may look as a rush. I take the word here. We have to be careful. Sometimes we want to do too many things to help, and it may become a bit too heavy. So we take the point, and we'll see how to follow up here. But clearly, proportionality, how to make sure you are not overwhelmed by all new OSD, for instance, development, the new tools, CPIAC, and so forth. Make sure that you get the right positive, constructive aspect and benefit in the end out of those tools, and not only the negative one, the weight, the burden to carry on your shoulders. And any weight additional you have on your small aircraft will reduce the performance. So it's really a concern to us how to support you as best as we can. And the GA Task Force, as you have seen, with Patrick Key sponsoring it from the beginning, is really one of our top priorities. So GA is really important to us. And how to shake a bit our regulatory system in GA, as you said, XL. I know personally the problem of XL. When I go into a shop where you have only XL, I go to the next shop because I have no chance. So I'm a bit like you here. I cannot live with XL, one size fits all clauses, for sure. So I know what you mean. Having said so, Dominique Roland is your best counterpart into our system. We have a lot of groups, advisory groups, working groups, rulemaking groups, coordination groups, etc. I agree, sometimes you may lose your way into them. When you have a doubt, go to our GA colleagues. As I said, and I will stop here, they are all passionate. They know a bit what they're talking about, for sure. And if you have any doubt, any question, any difficulty, go to them, to Dominique, to Manfred, to others. I'm pretty sure either they will find a solution and then they will be happy, or they will come to us, management, to help you. And that would be my conclusion. Thanks again for your presentation. Very interesting.
As you were waiting for your present. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And thanks also to all the others in that group and in the other groups. So the next topic for a slight change, we have now two related topics which are both linked to flight test. And the first one is about the categorization of flight tests within Rotorcraft, and Francesco Paolucci, senior expert, Rotary flight test, will guide you through this presentation. Thanks, Francesco.
Thank you. Good morning to everybody. My name is Francesco Paolucci. I work for the Rotorcraft department inside EASA. I'm a flight test engineer with roughly 25 years of experience on flight test. So, which is my objective during this very short presentation, is try to share with the audience the experience we gathered so far with the introduction of the new rules for flight test, especially for Rotorcraft. So I will start with a very quick recap on the most significant part of the Appendix 12, that is the core of the new regulations. I will share with you what we have seen on our side as challenging for the DOA, and try to explain what is our view on the way to simplify the process of a flight test classification, at least for Rotorcraft, and in the last part update you on what we did recently to improve the situation and simplify the life of the DOA with introduction of frequently asked questions on the subject of the flight test category for Rotorcraft. So let's start from the core, I would say, of the regulation. Everybody knows that the Appendix 12 is a very, let me say, complicated sometimes document, but the key elements are provided in this table that is shown in this slide, where the flight test, the category of flight tests are combined together with the competence level that is required to perform each flight test. And you see that from this table it is immediately visible that there are some aircraft categories that are not covered by the Appendix 12, like the general aviation aircraft that are below 2,000 kilograms, and the VLR for Rotorcraft. But you see there is a big difference between general aviation and fixed wing and Rotorcraft here, because the competence level that is required for Rotorcraft is higher depending on the type of test that is done. While there is an elevation for fixed wing, and you see that Category 1 test can be carried out by a competence level 2 crew, this is not the case for CS 27 and 29. So it's a more critical area. So in practical terms, what has to be done to reach the target, to identify which are the requirements to be applied to the crew that is involved in flight tests? So the first step is to determine which is the applicable category. So if I take a very straightforward example, I did it intentionally. I take a 23 aircraft that is not high performance, and I want to check the minimum control speed in flight. Then this is straightforward. If you read the material, is Cat 1 flight test. So the second step is which is the aircraft class, and as I said, it is falling into the category of the simple CS23. So from the table you can derive that actually a Category 2 flight test rating is enough for the test pilot and for the lead flight test engineers in case they are needed for the test. But this example for me was essential to show to you that what is really important at this stage is to correctly identify the category of flight test. If there is a wrong identification, then there is the potential for disagreement with the team who is in charge of performing the investigation from the EASA side. What we have seen so far, based on our experience, on our exposure working with you, we know there are some difficulties. First of all, because the rules entered in force recently. The different countries around Europe, they had different rules before the introduction of the EASA rules. Some countries had no rules at all for flight testing. And the responsibility is given to the DOA to perform the proper classification. And of course there is a need for the DOA to have guidance in their procedure or appropriate ways of doing that. And the last problem we have seen, sometimes there is a tendency to classify the flight test category based on what you have in-house, which is a normal human behavior, I would say, you know, not a surprise after all. Of course, for a brand new aircraft, the situation it is a little bit less difficult, because most of the cases what you are going to test is Category 1. But For people working on changes to an already approved aircraft, we have seen that the distinction between what is Cat 1 and what is Cat 2 can be challenging sometimes, and also the distinction between Cat 2 and 4 is not so easy. So, for instance, if we have an installation like this, or an installation like that, that is a little bit more challenging, you see, then it's not exactly the same, you know. But this is real life, because you know better than me that with the Rotorcraft you can have a large variety of external installation, and so we have to consider all the possible cases and try to find a way forward on this. What we think is the correct approach in this, we have to remember first of all that the principles behind Appendix 12 was to apply a flexible and proportional approach. Again, proportionality. Not to ask everything for all cases. Not everything is Category 1, okay? The second suggestion from our side, don't try to look at one specific classification paragraph. Try to implement an approach that we call top-down, starting from the definition of Category 1, trying to see if you can rule out if it is Category 1, then go to Category 2, and then go to Category 4. We have seen that sometimes people are trying to justify maybe a specific category, while it would be better to have this top-down approach. And while doing that, of course, don't get confused with maintenance check flights, because these are out of the rules that we are speaking about at the moment. And this is a subject, different subject, that will be considered through a different rule-making task. So, there are anyway some basic points that can be said when we speak about this subject. If we consider flight test of an aircraft that is brand new, not yet certified, it can only be Category 1 or Category 2. If we have a modification of an already approved aircraft, can be 1, 2, and 4. A Category 3 should be applied only when the aircraft has been approved. And then what is important, and sometimes is tricky, consider if the flight test you are going to perform is bringing the aircraft out of the standard operational envelope, the standard operational use of the aircraft. For example, it's not appropriate to Rotorcraft, but I think it's important to clarify the point. If I'm testing the terrain awareness for a big airline and say I have to fly low altitude in certain conditions, this is not the typical way a big airline is flown. May be the case for a Rotorcraft that are more often flying low altitude, and so this is a very important point to consider when the classification has to be made. So, other very important tips. A flight test that is intended to show that a single equipment installed in the cockpit works properly. 1301 is the relevant paragraph of the CCL, should be classified probably as Cat 4. But if I have to fly the aircraft outside of the limitation of the flight manual to do this activity, then it cannot be Cat 4 anymore. For Rotorcraft, sometimes we have to fly 1.11 VNE. In that case, we cannot say that it is Cat 4. And most important, when the activity that is carried out requires to consider a reassessment of the cockpit procedures, and there is a need, in other words, to reconsider human-machine interface aspects of the workload and so on. This should be considered Category 2. This is typically the case of IFR aircraft. There is guidance material inside the Appendix 12, but however, because of this approach to provide a flexible and proportional way of addressing things, of course the guides and material cannot be considered a cooking book. Unfortunately, you cannot find inside all the examples you would like to see. And so it's difficult. So if we go back to the previous examples, it's most likely an external installation like this would be category 1 if you have to check handling qualities and performance. Perhaps this one would fall under category 2. So it's not so easy to do this classification, but there are ways to help. So having seen the challenges experienced by you and shared with us, we have worked recently on a list of examples that we call frequently asked questions, where we have put together a lot of examples of category 1, category 2, and category 4 flight tests. Of course, we know since the beginning that despite all the effort we did, there will be other cases we haven't considered. But the idea that we had in mind was to provide examples that were able to show the principles behind the application of the rule in order to provide a tool to help the classification. This list is going to be published on the website very soon. I just took a couple of examples from this list that is a document of many different pages. So if we have to install an avionic equipment that introduce the LPV capability on an IFR-approved rotorcraft. So this is a typical case where you have to check if the system is working correctly, the human-machine interface, and of course the procedures for flying an LPV approach during normal and emergency condition can be different from the same procedures for the ILS approach. So according to this, to the guidance material to Appendix 12, this should be classified as Category 2. Another example, if we install a standalone HTOS that is not integrated with the rest of the cockpit, it's just a single piece of equipment there and is not connected to the rest. So in this case, again, the correct functioning of the system is one of the objectives of the test. The human-machine interface is already there, but there is no requirement to perform a dedicated assessment of the cockpit procedure or to establish appropriate emergency procedures for the use of the equipment, and perhaps there is already an example of the flight manual supplement that can be implemented. So in this case, it could be classified as Category 4. So this is what you will see published on the web, and as I said before, the list will not be so exhaustive. We know since the beginning, although we've been working for months, there will be something that we didn't consider, but the idea was to provide a tool to understand how the basic principles should be implemented to achieve a correct classification of the flight test category. Questions?
Thanks, Francesco. I think we got 2 questions. The first one, I don't know whether you can answer that, is any recommendation how to split arrange flights in consecutive order by rotorcraft under simultaneous modification and maintenance, e.g. first a Cat 2 flight test, then a Cat 4, and then a maintenance check flight. So any advice on how to organize these things?
Well, as I said before, the maintenance check flights are out of the Appendix 12, so we shouldn't apply the classification that are applicable for certification. Sorry.
Thank you.
Tuomo, you are the owner of the question.
I am the owner of the question. There was limited wording
Okay.
possible. But if I clarify my question, if the platform has been undergoing extensive maintenance, and first you need to check that you have track and balance and engine parameters and the transmission and all those things are working properly, but at the same time you have changed all your communication and navigation system, then you are kind of a egg or chicken. Which one you verify first, and how do you categorize? So then the maintenance check flight, if you ask me, will also be category 2 because you have the modification unchecked, or how do you see this situation?
The way I see the situation is that the flight test operational manual of the company should include a provision for such cases and define an envelope within which the flight that is aimed to achieve a different objective to check that maybe the rotor balance, track and balance, is not to consider a flight test at all. So you define an envelope within which you can fly even with the installed equipment, but not for a purpose of developing the installed equipment or showing compliant with the regulations. And maybe it's saying you can do this just VFR day or with a limited envelope and classify this as a maintenance flight. This is the best way I see for the time being. When the rule-making task for maintenance flights will be completed, of course, we may need to reconsider the situation.
Okay, we got one more question. It's about the FAQs on the website. Found very useful, but how would people know when and if they are updated, amended?
Yeah, that is a good question, but we will try our best to control the situation and see if there are additional points that are not considered in our list, or something that we, let me say, considered as a simple case, and for you it is not the case. In this case, we will update the list of sure together with our DOA colleagues, and this, I think, should be communicated in some way on the web that we have an updated list.
Well, I think you can subscribe to certain pages on the website, and that might be the best thing to do, because then you will automatically be notified when there is an update. Okay, due to the time, I would say thanks a lot, Francesco, and I would like to lead over to the next topic, which is also flight test related. I won't read the title because it's too long. It was developed by Massimo Barocco, of Chief Expert Flight and Human Factors, and the Grecha team leader in the DOA department, and our focal point for Rotorcraft and flight.
Okay. Hello, everybody. As Marcus just said, I'm presenting this on behalf of Massimo. I'll do my best so you don't feel you have only second choice here. What is the issue of this one? It's really related to what Francesco said before. Skipping this. We have rather recent rules on flight test activities within the design organization. They're approximately 2 years old, and we have seen that in the implementation of those rules there are some difficulties. And some of them have been just presented by Francesco, like problems with categorization. We have some other problems on the FTOM, where we see that the level of detail in the FTOM might not be adequate for the organization. We see lack of experience or competence in some organizations, but mainly we see that in organizations who have little activity in the flight test domain. So others, regular flight test activity, it's a complete different picture. But we have to somehow address those cases where, let's say, that the trust and the competence is a bit limited. The problem we face, or the risk we see, is that we could end up in flight test activity that does not really meet the level of safety we would expect. And especially if we have our staff involved, of course we need to have some measures to protect them. And in the end, what we've developed should also help you to protect yourself from entering into unsafe conditions during flight testing. I do agree that the title of this presentation is a bit long. It just means one thing. We have established a very simple tool to try to identify issues as early as possible in a project. It is a checklist. There is nothing new in there. It's just combining what we already have in a proper sequence that can be applied throughout a project so that we can identify issues as early as possible, address them properly, and thus reduce the risk. This checklist, it's an internal document, but as you will have this presentation, which includes a full checklist, you have access and you can use it for yourselves if you deem it appropriate. In this checklist, there is a number of checks that should be performed, if applicable, mainly if we don't know an organization because of limited flight test activity, or it's a new organization. Some of those checks are not necessary if we are in constant contact with the organization on flight test activities, because then we already know. Checks have been divided or structured on some organization-related checks, test-related checks, and operational checks. And we just go through them and I'll try to explain what is meant by those if necessary. If we receive an application for a project that involves flight test activities, the first thing, and that's standard, what the PCM should do is check whether the organization may do that. Flight testing is not a privilege, it's not a specific scope in terms of approval, but we might have limitations. So especially when we found that an organization has not set up any FTOM at all, or has not been interested in doing flight tests before, there might be a limitation in the terms of approval that that organization may not perform flight test activities. And then, of course, we have the first issue here that has to be addressed. A second check would be to check the rating of the organization in the field of flight testing. This is the dashboard that you've seen yesterday, but we have some more supportive information that could be taken into account, just to see, do we already know some, or have we more knowledge about the performance of that organization in the flight test activities? There's a chance to review previous audit reports that address flight testing to identify issues that might be there. The current status of the FTOM should be checked, because it's possible that there are findings or open action items on the FTOM, or maybe the organization by itself started to redraft the FTOM because the scope is slightly extended, they already identified issues. So it's important to understand, is the FTOM that is on our web the latest version, or are there some changes ongoing? And especially if no flight test activity has been performed before and we had to accept the FTOM just by a pure document check, it's important to once again review the FTOM to identify, are there any issues that might be missing? This is the last check. It does not mean we will review all the FTOMs again. It's really just a check to get a final confirmation that everything has been addressed. And if we should find any gaps, we still have the chance to address those gaps as early as possible, because the later we identify them, the more severe is the impact on your project, and we want to avoid that, of course. Then standard checks. The certification program and the related flight test program will be reviewed by PCM and Panel 1, and it should be agreed. Especially with low experience companies, we have lots of discussions on this one, or had in the past at least. Preliminary flight test data, reports, whatever is addressed in those programs should be reviewed. And then, as you've just learned from Francesco, it's quite important for us to verify that the categorization of the flight test is appropriate. If, for example, you classify a flight test that is clearly Cat 2 as a Cat 4, we have a safety issue, because then the competence requirement for the pilots would not be sufficient, and so on. So it's important to check that very early. Well, we check all other documents like flight test orders, flight test cards, whatever you have in your system, to make sure that our flight team is happy with what you provide. And then, of course, substantiation for the flight conditions is the risk analysis of those of the flight test activity. We want to see the mitigation measures you have identified, possible limitations, just to understand your assessment of the flight and to be convinced that we share that point of view. The next thing is, this is first general, ensure that you as an organization can provide the flight test personnel that has appropriate qualifications for that flight test. We have understood that for organizations with low activity in flight testing, it's almost impossible to have own flight crews, and it's very difficult to have frame agreements with flight crews. So we accepted for you to get an arrangement with flight test crew on a project basis. What is important, and this is, I would say, lessons learned from the experience, and we have maybe not always addressed it in sufficient detail. You need to identify how such flight crew is then really introduced to your project. We don't want to see the flight crew appearing at the day of flight test. They have to be involved earlier on. They have to understand what you're planning to do. What are the risks associated with the flight? What are the mitigating measures? They have to be involved much earlier. And of course, I'm not addressing every one of you, but I'm quite sure there are a number of you who should recheck their RFTOMs and maybe add some detail on this specific point, because this is something that we probably didn't focus enough on. Another important issue here is that we need to understand that you have the resources during the project as soon as possible, and we would expect to see some kind of arrangement where you demonstrate you have the competent flight crew around the time of providing the certification program, because that's when you identify there is flight test need. So then you can demonstrate you have the resources in place, and we can be assured that we can process that project without encountering all of a sudden a complete stop just because you can't provide the compliant demonstration that is needed. We have to check that all safety concerns have been adequately covered related to flight crew. This includes the currency requirements, so it's a flight crew that you have. Or first, are your requirements on currency adequate? And later on, does the flight crew meet those currency requirements? On the other side, you should be happy with our flight crew. We should check is the flight crew that we provide sufficiently familiarized with the aircraft, with the project. Maybe they need some additional training specific to your flight test campaign. You know best what you plan to do, so you should identify that, and in the end, check that you're happy that the flight crew, which in the end consists of your flight crew and our flight crew, but it's one crew, that they can work properly together. It's a major issue of CRM here. Operation-related checks. So once we're on the scene, the flight experts should check that the test crew that will perform the flight test is qualified and appropriate. So flight test rating is, well, it does not lose its validity, but there is an appropriate flight test rating, the currency. This could be checked on the dedicated crew. Ensure that the test flight is adequately briefed. Usually we participate to that briefing, so we understand that very soon. Ask for weight and balance checks, have confirmation that it's known, appropriate. These are standard checks that would be performed before you perform a flight. So I'm quite sure we do that already. It's nothing new. It's just put in this list for completion. We have to make sure that the first topic seems to be a bit hard to understand. What we mean here is an equivalent to the flight manual provided, including all that information. For flight tests, we don't ask for the AFM as specified in the CS, but at least the important information must be provided. We need to see that all aircraft installations, equipment, instruments that are relevant for the test, including flight test instrumentation, is calibrated, and, if applicable, that the test crew is equipped with appropriate safety equipment. These are straightforward checks. None of those checks is new. We just put them in the right order and asking for the project team to perform those checks as the project advances, so we are in a position to identify issues as early as possible. And if we do identify them, we try to find a solution. So if we identify issues with the FTOM at the earliest stage, the PCM would communicate, of course, to the applicant saying we have an issue, also to the DOA team leader to manage the resolution of that issue. If you find issues later on during the flight condition approval process, we discussed it before, we could approve those flight conditions. And at a later stage, if the EASA flight test crew should identify any issues, they should stop the flight activity or at least their involvement in the flight test activity on the spot, of course, explain why they stop it, get into contact with your section manager, with the senior expert to clarify how to proceed with this one, with the situation. The idea is to have safe flight tests. I think we all agree that that's the most important bit, efficient flight test activities. And we don't want to put at risk your project, but it must be performed safely. And I'm quite sure we all agree on that one. This document, the checklist, is considered to be a temporary measure. Don't misunderstand this one. The checks are not temporary. We will probably perform those checks. The checklist is temporary because we might cover some of those checks in improved procedures later on. But this is what we will do. And I already stated we perform those checks as early as possible to give you time to resolve identified situations. And yeah, of course, if we are highly have real issues, then we would postpone the flight test activity. This was very short because I think most issues are very straightforward. They don't require too much explanation. But I'm happy to answer to any questions. And if I, just being a team leader, am not in a position to answer those, Francesco is still here, and I'm quite sure he will assist me in dealing with those questions that I can't answer. So please go ahead.
Thanks, Dirk. Start maybe with a question from Slido. And I don't know whether it's you or Francesco to answer that. Who is responsible for the aircraft during flight testing, the DOA or the operator? Who must provide insurance for flight testing, DOA or operator?
Do you want? No. Well, honestly, this is one of the tricky questions, and yeah, I was expecting something like that. If you read Part 21, it's clear. The idea of Part 21 is the design organization is the operator of the aircraft. That's the way the rule is written. Now, let's see real life. We have problems with that one. I understand that. And I can't provide you a solution of that one because if you look at all the regulations we have in place, for me, this is one area where they don't fit properly. So I can't provide you the final answer. I understand that problem. I know that problem. Unfortunately, I can't provide you a solution. Part 21 is clear. DOA is the operator. Real life, quite often, is different.
Okay, one more question. It's related to the availability of EASA pilots due to the workload situation. How can it be better managed? And how can the experience of the EASA certification pilots be managed if it's not available? So,
well, of course, I could not answer to that one, not being in a position to do so.
That's for Alain to answer.
I'm reading again the question, how can the sufficient experience of the agency certification test pilot be managed if there is not enough availability caused by panel 1 workload situation? That means not enough workload. Well, first, it's not the case at the moment. I can confirm, unfortunately or fortunately, so the work is rather high on our pilots. We never see them. So, but having said so, more seriously, we are working with other directorates, with our flight standard colleagues responsible for air crew and also responsible for standardization, visit and inspections, and having the OSD pilots working for us in this directorate. We are having a kind of horizontal approach on how to maintain pilot proficiency and skills. You have two scenarios. The scenario people are flying enough in their domain of expertise, and we do regular check, and we confirm the expertise is okay, and we keep going as any expertise. Now, if it ever happens, it could be the case in some GA activity, for instance, that our pilots are not flying enough according to the rules or according to our internal standards. We have arrangements with the flight test pilot schools, and we would have to make sure that they are kept current. So to keep it short, we have a lot of internal safeguards here. Massimo Barocco, our chief expert flight, is really very stringent in that respect. I rely on him to make sure that all our colleagues are kept current, and we work on what we call an executive director decision, how to maintain all pilots, not only panel 1, but all pilots proficiency and skills. So don't worry, when you see someone from the agency, they are all at the highest standard. We cannot send someone who is not fulfilling our expectations visiting a DOA that were qualifying. That would not make any sense. So in a nutshell, the question is very relevant. It's valid for not only panel 1, it could be extended to any panel, how to maintain proficiency, and I can guarantee you that this is, from a management perspective, one of our top priority. How to ensure that we remain on the top, whatever the expertise is, and even we try to be a bit ahead. That's the vision. If we have this vision, at least we can make sure that we are current. So we will have some more questions. I see there are some more coming. I think, Marcus, we are a bit short of time, so we go to the next. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dirk, for this presentation. And the next topic is the feedback from the Rotorcraft side meeting. Henning Roberstadt, again volunteered or was volunteered by the group to do the presentation. So welcome to the floor. Oh, you got some reinforcements. So the floor is yours.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Yes, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As Manfred said, I'm Henning Oberstad from Heli1 Norway, and I'm joined here on stage by Manfred Bleyer because he's the group's expert on, we have 6 topics to cover, and he's covering topic number 6. Yeah, so we are here to present the outcome of the Tuesday's discussions from the Rotorcraft community. So first of all, thank you to EASA for hosting this. It was quite a fruitful set of discussions for a full day, and we will be presenting 6 abstracts from the outcome of that group. The list of participants you can see on the right-hand side. So a lot of interesting companies joined together. So first slide. Topic number 1. It's the EPA marking on parts manufactured by Maintenance 145 organization, where there are some issues. As we have covered earlier today, that 145 organizations, they can manufacture their own parts, put on the aircraft that they are working on for maintenance. And we see it as DOA that sometimes the marking of these parts, they cause some debate. Whereas the Part 21 requires that each part and appliance shall be marked permanently and legibly. Some Part 145 organizations have the competent authority approving procedures that does not require marking of certain parts. And it's, I'm not sure if it's based on practicality or if they just are missing that point, but we got some pushback, or there was some pushback on DOAs for omitting the marking parts on specific parts. And also that, as it says, from practicality issues. So we had some regulatory references that were put up and were terms of discussion. So on Part 21, we did not discuss the paragraphs 109, 118, and 451, but we did discuss the 439 and the 804 when it comes to marking. And also looked a bit on the 145 regulations on paragraph 42, specifying the marking. So the practical issues that were reported were that there are different marking methods, and where on specific parts the mechanical marking could create stress points, especially on skin and stringer parts. And ink and print may be removed by paint or sealing solvents. And some shapes and sizes are awkward to mark. And also that OEM repair parts that were issued even with the Form 1 and the appropriate marking. They had the marking removed by installation preparations during degreasing and practically left the part unmarked when installed on the aircraft. And then aircraft maintenance records will contain traceability to structural repairs through the approved data, including detailed instructions and locations, and thereby fulfilling the requirement of the or the intent of the regulations. So that's probably the reason for the pushback from 145 is that, well, they fulfill the intention, and then when it's unpractical to mark, they will get approved procedures not to. So the specific discussions items is if it's really up to the design holder to define if a part should be marked or not in each specific case, and if the design organization mandates part number marking and the 145 organization have the competent authority approved procedures where this marking should be disregarded, if that's acceptable by us as a design holder. And also if there are more suitable means of marking, especially the structural repair parts that is not removed and does not alter the mechanical features of the part. So the conclusion from the group from this discussion was that the design organizations shall deliver part 145 suitable instructions to mark each part of any change or repair. And marking is mandatory for the 145 organization in order to successfully complete the installation of the change based on the approved data. And also at the same time, there are a very small peephole for alleviation based on practicality, but should never be a general procedure. So next topic, that's the everyday issue of having a roadworthy gyroplane trying to fly and being certified under the CS27, which proves to be a challenge. So we have this manufacturer, PALV, that is manufacturing a roadworthy two-seat gyroplane. And being roadworthy, it's slightly too heavy to be a VLA, meaning that the CS29 is defined as the applicable certification basis for this one. Requests were raised by PALV to have this performance-based or objective proportionality to the risk of the aircraft, as opposed to the stringent regulations of the basic CS27. And also that the acceptable safety level on existing standards like the ASTM would be assessed and interpreted and used related to the emergency conditions for the specific gyroplanes. Yeah, so there's a picture just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. To the left, it's a roadworthy condition, and to the right is folded out and ready to fly, if it can only be certified. So, especially on the paragraph 562 for the emergency landing conditions, it's too demanding. And also that there is a suggestion to follow the same principles that we used on the revision of CS23 Amendment 5 as we heard earlier with the proportionality. And this is one passenger aircraft, by the way. Yeah, so the conclusion of the discussion was that there is certainly support for the idea, and that there is already a working group working on this proportionality that we have heard also for CS27 and 29. And we hope it will follow more or less the same roadmap as for CS23, even though we register that there are some issues still there as well. And of course there's a timeline to this. And currently there is the alleviation through the use of certification review items, but this is usually very time-consuming and very costly also for new type certificate applicants. Yeah. So next topic is discussion that were on the STC management, the expectations between cooperation between the agency, the type certificate holders, and the STC holders. Yeah, so we share the mutual expectations of the different stakeholders, like the authorities, TC holder, and STC holders, looking for different points of view. And it's possible to recognize common expectations, even if they are differently formalized within the different stakeholders. It has been underlined that the differences between different authorities in terms of rules and guidance material. And EASA provides a set of rules in the AMC and guidance material, but also referring to the STC and the TC relationship. And it's also mentioned in the TCCA, but not in the FAA system. Yeah, so the incompatibility matters with other equipment, meaning the configuration, will an STC fit to a specific set of configuration, or should it be limited, and what are the criteria? And it's treated in a different way during compliance demonstration, and formalized the final result that need to be shared with the operator, meaning that limitations put into the STC for specific configurations, they should also be included in the documentation provided to the operator of the changed product. Yes, and where there is a type certificate and STC holder arrangement, it's only used in very few cases. I think a matter of magnitude, about 2 or 3 cases for one of the major Rotorcraft manufacturers, so it's not very used. But and also it's mainly used when the change is relatively wide on the impact on the aircraft level. Yeah, so this incompatibility is mostly managed through attention of specific AC configurations used for showing of compliance, meaning the prototype aircraft for which the STC was developed and tested. And that configuration is described in the STC, and the installation instruction used to build the prototype should include this. And also that further follow-on installations should have a check of the aircraft configuration to check if it's compatible with the limitations or the list in the STC. And then it's further on to an interpretation of the guidance material from AC 27-1 and AC 29-2 with a focus on miscellaneous guidance for helicopter emergency medical service interior. So there was a presentation that we shared with the group. The current strategy of for basically certification of HEMS interiors for helicopter. Some examples were listed where there are difficulties and inconsistencies, especially the isolette or incubator, where it's actually carrying a passenger, but there's no qualifications of the restraining system or the flammability of the incubator itself, and also general for any medical equipment, there are no certification or aircraft recognized standards for the flammability of those equipment. And also there is the ambiguity of carry-on equipment. When is an equipment actually installed on the aircraft, and when is it carry-on equipment by medical personnel? And also it's a major problem with the commercial off-the-shelf equipment normally installed on these medical interiors, is that there is no consistency between the qualification of the components themselves or the parts themselves with the applicable 1301, 1307 and 1309 paragraphs of CS27 and 29. And also, of course, the requirements to the production of medical equipment is not in accordance with Part 21. Yeah, and it's also very difficult to find where the aeronautical certification of a component ends and where the medical approval of the same equipment starts, because the medical qualifications of such equipment is usually a lot stricter than the airworthiness assessments that are done, but they are different, so they are not covered. So implying a change to a medical component to make it airworthy is maybe sometimes reducing the function of it. Yeah, so as a conclusion, the design organization usually just certify provisions for medical equipment and do not install this equipment, meaning that the design organization do not take responsibility for the freight and use of medical equipment on board in EMS aircrafts. And in these AC 27-1 and 29-2, there are no there are supplemental requirements to be completed, but it's sometimes inconsistent with maintaining the medical qualification of the equipment. So the applicant itself, meaning the DOA, will choose how far to go with the qualification of the medical equipment and also what to include in the STC type design, meaning that usually we stop at installing provisions and then leave the use and carrying of the equipment to the operator. And I understand that EASA also is trying to work on the topic along the lines of the CS25 VIP interiors to have some special guidelines for the HEMS. And also the qualification of the components to make them suitable for flight is left with the operator. So of course the DOA can provide testing means and also to guide the operator, but the DOA usually do not take responsibility for the carrying and operation of the medical equipment on board during flight. And along the same lines, there are the certification of oxygen systems in helicopter, and these are systems for medical purposes, not used by the flight crew. And there is a basis in a certification review item that covers the installation of medical oxygen. And it's, of course, aimed at reducing the safety risks for the helicopter themselves. They don't care too much about the function of the medical oxygen, but you can use it as long as it doesn't constitute a risk to the safe operation of the aircraft. And the same as with medical equipment, it's quite complicated at this stage to assume compliance both with EASA regulations and the European Union medical standards for oxygen systems, because they are contradictory in some ways. So the tests required are listed in this certification review item, and also they're mentioning the transient pressure level tests, and but it's always discussed on a case-by-case basis without any further certification guidance from EASA. So as conclusion on this topic, EASA is preparing a comparison between DO 160G and industrial environmental requirements like EN norms and the likes. And the certification review items should be adequately diffused, meaning available to more people and more commonly known for whoever's providing modification to this kind of role-based aircraft modifications. And the EASA qualification stops at the no hazard to the helicopter without further assessment. So again, don't really care too much about if the oxygen system works with the patient, but as long as it doesn't make any hazard to the aircraft. And it's possible and acceptable to, once you have demonstrated with the proper list, to use medical standards to demonstrate the EASA requirements if a proper reference with the certification review item is provided. Meaning that there could be, you should assess the civilian medical standards and then compare them to the airworthiness ones and make use of the equipment qualification and the system qualifications from the medical manufacturer. So I hand it over to Manfred to take you closer to lunch. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Manfred Bleier. I'm providing support to flight in respect to flight test activities on Rotorcraft, and we identified this subject of required navigation performance changes and difficulties from small STC holders in relation to interpretation of the material available on that subject and the amount of testing needed for that. Within the group, we identified 4 subjects related to this RMP, and I will speak briefly about these 4 items identified. Let me start first with that different terms used for RMP, or for those not familiar with the term RMP, required navigation performance, in simpler words, integration of GPS system into aircraft, or in this case helicopters. So the different terms used. So we have our OPS regulation defining 4 RMP approaches, fairly obvious: LNAV, LNAV VNAV, LPV, and LP, localizer performance. However, there is material available in addition, or terms available, talking about LNAV plus V. Vertical guidance is advisory or certified vertical guidance. And last but not least, and there are other terms used which are not that clear or easy to find, APV bar or VNAV, for example, which is not addressed in the OPS regulation so far, so different terms used, and that leads to some kind of lack of understanding what is really needed and what is meant behind. Experts from EASA agreed to that. Yes, that is sometimes that is there. There are different terms used, and it would be a lot easier for all of us, industry as well as authority and the agency, to have a bit more clarification on these different terms used. Next topic is the guidance material available. So there is plenty of material available. There is guidance material MG1 in relation to helicopters. There is all this listed there. Thousands of pages, really, the information is there. The difficulty is to find the relevant information. And as we are all industry imposed to follow human factors principle, it would be a wish list prior Christmas to have that taken into consideration for such a specific subject as well, not to overload industry and as well authority with, yes, the information is there, but it's up to you to find the correct reference. That was confirmed, and let's see if we can, or if EASA, together with industry, maybe can find a more clear definition and a more clear roadmap through all these requirements available. Next one is a specific item which was confirmed by EASA as well, is that field of view. The existing AMC 2027A talks about the normal field of view. So, and I'm quite sure some of you are aware that the requirement, there is no normal field of view in the requirement. In 1321, there is the primary field of view and the secondary field of view. So that was identified by the experts of EASA, and a clarification will come most probably. Last but not least is the amount of flight testing is often underestimated in such an RMP project. Just because of the fact you change the navigation source to an instrument and you create or you intend to get more operational capability with PPN approval. Unfortunately, it was identified by the all group members that the flight test required to get certification is underestimated by the STC applicant and as well from the authorities. The solution on that one is early involvement of flight test team in respect to the amount of tests needed and the time needed for that, and the costs involved are needed at a very early stage. I would like to finish this presentation with a picture of the group members. I would like to thank the really great amount of experts provided to the helicopter group for these individual subjects. Thank you for that, and we're finished with our presentation.
Yeah, thank you for the topics. At some stage I was thinking, while you're talking about STCs, were you in the wrong group? Because we had a group on STCs, but I think there were more things related to Rotorcraft than purely STCs. We didn't receive any questions, which I think is pretty normal for these feedback groups. But I would like to thank also here Dirk Richard, who ran the group and supported the industry members in their discussion. So again, thanks to the whole group and to the two presenters. Thanks a lot. And with that, I think we have well deserved the lunch break. Can you please be back at 20 to 2? They have 6 slides with 40 minutes.